Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the Narco-Saints season finale, maybe straight up finale. A great episode, a lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So, first and foremost, the fact is that Ingu has that nightmare at the beginning where it's like, that's Jion had figured him out and then ended up killing his wife and his two kids. And kind of the worst nightmare to have, considering everything going down. But it's understandable. You're nervous as hell because if this goes wrong, it could go super wrong. So, it's time for everything. Everything's kind of falling into place. Obviously, the DEA and Choi kind of set up the operation and stuff like that. I don't know if this is just me reading too much into it, but it did seem like they were kind of making it seem like a lot of like the DEA agents were kind of gun-ho about like, oh, is there going to be resistance? It's like, yeah, there's some like 20 armed people. They're like, yeah, it's like, I don't know if that's supposed to be almost like oh yeah, like the US could be aggressive or something like that. And like, oh, they're always ready for a battle. Like, I don't know if that was supposed to be like if that was, I don't know if I was reading too much into that, but they seemed like they were celebratory. Like, all right, we're going to take down some bad. I don't know, like, oh, this ain't just going to be some regular takedown. It's going to be like a fight. Once again, I might be reading too much into that, but just their response, I was like, it seems like that's the type of response you should be having about that. But either way, I did love that Choi had to like deal with a little bit of a snafu because once again the NIS has to fund a lot of this, and they wanted the DEA needed the NIS to be like the guarantors. I guess like right, you upfront so much of the operational costs and like you kind of take any blame if anything happens because the DEA was supposed to like unofficial like I guess. Because later on, they kind of make a lot of their moves more official because it's like, oh, we here as the DEA, they're like putting that out there. So I guess I guess with the NIS backing up a lot of stuff, maybe like from a more financial standpoint, it made it so like, okay, we don't have to just, I guess the original plan was like, we'll do mercenaries and stuff like that, but with things changing and developing as they are, the DEA can now like officially step in. Maybe that's what it is. I do love that Choi's boss is kind of like, no, like just end all this. It's like, wait, we're this close. It's like, okay. He's like, we would never make a decision without your say so. He's like, there you go. You and your silver tongue. It's like, fine, go ahead. And then like, Choi gets inside. He's like, yes. And the agent that's like on the other side of the room is just kind of turning to almost look like, okay, because everything's kind of falling into place. So the entire time I'm just kind of like nervous because like the entire episode had me on my edge of my seat. So I'm like, dude, they're like, I was like, I'm pretty sure Ingu's gonna be okay, but like Agent Kim, I didn't know if he was gonna be okay. I figured Jion would get taken down, but I'm just like, you never know. Like, there's always last minute developments and twists and turns, and there was a big hefty one because it was supposed to be Ingu being the one to drop off the drugs, and then obviously the DEA like kind of like do their thing and they come to Suriname and like bust Jion. But Jion and Lee talked about it last minute amongst themselves. I don't think they willingly left Jion out of that conversation. Maybe like Lee was like, maybe just do this. But it's like the fact is that Lee had that suspicious look on his face when he was looking at Byun and Ingu, that now it's like all of a sudden he's the one that's going to go to Puerto Rico to kind of handle the deal, which Ingu's like, no, let me handle it. It's like, oh, why? You know, Ingu, you're going to leave and then immediately come back here anyway. He's like, you're 100% right. I'm sorry. So yeah, so obviously it didn't go according to plan that him and Byun were kind of hoping for. So on the Puerto Rico side of things, they kind of had to, call a little bit of an audible, especially because when Lee rolled up, he was like, no, you don't get to check the coke first. We got to check the money. Plus, Choi had to also keep it from the DEA, like what was kind of going on. He was trying to make it seem like everything was still a little above board because he was talking to his subordinates in Korea, and just so that the DEA agent that he's working with doesn't understand what's going on. So had to call an audible here and there and fill them in about certain things, but it's still interesting. And I was scared the entire time because they were like, right, like the fact is that Lee's here and Ingu Inga was forced to stay in Suriname. Could it be that Jion is onto us? How do we know that there's even any coke actually on that plane? And I was like, when the bust happened, when they got Lee, I was like, oh God. Oh, I was like, oh God, oh God, oh God. There's not going to be any coke in there, especially when like the cocoa like fell out. I was like, oh God, there's not going to be any coke, is it? And they pulled out the coke. I was like, oh God, thank God. I was like, oh man, please. I was so scared. I was legitimately worried there wasn't going to be, it's a weird sentence for me to say, but I was like, I was so worried. I thought there wasn't going to be any cocaine in there. That's a sentence that shouldn't be taken out of context. But I was like legitimately worried for a second, but then it's like, okay, it's all good. It's okay. So, but the problem is like, right, they can go to Suriname and go after, Jion now, but now they also have to worry about like, well, Kim is one thing, they know to be on the lookout for him, and they also are aware of Ingu, but it's also like, yeah, he's kind of got to take care of himself during this whole thing, because we can't be so worried about looking after a civilian. And so the entire time you're just nervous because you're like, I don't know if Jion knows anything. And it's like, he's a little worried, but he's also like just paranoid in general. I mean, to be fair, like he's kind of had things kind of blow up in his face multiple times, not just over the course of the show that, you know, what we got in storyline wise, of course, across these 6 episodes, things kind of blow up in his face. Episode 1, and then with the Brazil route, and now this, and well, everything with Chen. So like, it's just one failure after another. So he has every right to be paranoid because he's scared. Like, oh, I legitimately can't fuck this up again, because if I fuck this up and this does not go well the way I want it to, the Cali cartel is going to fucking bury me. So it's understandable why he's a little paranoid and on edge, and he's paying attention to the fact is that he's like, oh, Biyun and Ingo, it seemed like you two were whispering to each other, like, have you guys become close friends or something? He's like, no. I was complaining about the fact is he kept flipping the meat so much. You keep doing that, there's not going to be any juice. And he's like, hey, I'm doing this because this is the way Jion taught me. So it's like, okay. Just once again, you're just not sure. But the moment he's trying to keep calling Lee, you're like, okay, so he doesn't. He's a little weary, but he doesn't like know anything for sure. He doesn't even have like not a concrete feeling about something. But then he starts getting a little nervous because it's like, I'm calling Lee and he's not picking up. And they were like trying to like text, like be like, all right, look back through Lee's text and try to text back to Jion, like as if Lee's texting. And one of Choi's subordinates is there being like, hey, you want to do this, because if you don't do this, like, yeah, in Korea you'll go down for like 10 years, but the DEA, they're going to stack even more on top of it. But he's just kind of like, oh, like, God will protect me, like, you can't really, I won't be bound by human laws. It's like, okay, you'll say that, but human laws will still be responsible for burying you past, like, you know, and you'll be in prison until the day you die. He's like, or maybe even beyond that. So it's like, right, the moment he's like, now pick up the phone, I was like, I was nervous again. Like I said, this episode had me anxious as hell, because I'm like, okay, I was like, he's gonna rat, he's gonna say something to Jion, he's gonna screw this whole thing up. I was like, oh, this is bad. And then he was like, yeah, Pastor, sorry, the reception was bad. I was like, oh, I was like, okay, you're not saying anything. And then he mentions the champagne. I was like, that was a fucking code sign, wasn't it? And afterwards, like, Jion went to his other guy and like almost like a come on. You're like, oh, he knows something's up. I mean, luckily earlier Jion had like wasn't able to do it to every car just because some of his guns for hire ended up stopping him. I mean, well, interrupting him. But luckily he was able to kind of like screw up some of the cars, but not all of them. But at just the moment he pulled the guy away, I was like, oh my God, it was a code. Because none of them realized, like, oh, like he said, but the moment he mentioned a drink, I was like, that's weird. I mean, because it's like, it's no different from like the whole thing of like, and that might just be like a general like Korean greeting. I'm not well versed in Korean culture, so I don't know if that's like a typical like greeting over the phone. But like, oh, are you eating well? And it's like, oh yeah, like, because I think it is that thing of just like, because like having a healthy appetite is seen as being healthy, so I think it's just a thing of like, okay, are you eating well? Are you being treated nicely? Are you being taken care of? I think that's where that like Korean hospitality kind of comes in. Like, oh, I hope you are being like treated well. I hope you're eating well. I hope you're keeping healthy. You're keeping your stamina up. You're keeping your energy up. So, because obviously I haven't said anything until now, but obviously like that's how. But I think it's also kind of like it's probably like a typical like it might be like just your typical Korean thing, but it also might be like their little bit of a code sign to be like, yo, like, let's make sure we're both like playing our role of, oh, I'm Sangwon Gu, and I'm not Agent Joy right now, like, so. My point was, I figured it was probably like a code sign, kind of like that type of situation, and it was enough to make, because he ends up coming back, he's like, yeah, so what's going on in Puerto Rico? And Ingu's like, what are you talking about? It's like, Lee mentioned champagne, right? Have you never noticed the fact is he doesn't drink? I was like, fuck! I was like, that's not good. He's like, yeah, I mean, maybe he's just so overwhelmed because he saw all that cash and everything, yada, 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 so on and so forth. But he pulls the gun on him. He's like, because he didn't immediately think like, oh, cops. He's immediately thinking like, oh, you and your boy are trying to screw me over, aren't you? You're trying to take the coke for yourself, was his immediate thought, which I'm like, that's a better thought than him thinking that you're cops, because you being with the cops or whatever, he'd immediately kill you. But at least he thinks like, okay, he's trying to figure it out. It's like, what are you up to? And luckily at the same time, the DEA is rolling in the flight, and that they're going a little below radar. Sadly, because of his connections, he was able to call the president just to like send out like jets to check out the situation. So he finds out from them like, wait, it's the DEA. Like, what did you do, John, that the DEA is rolling up on my place? And the fact of the matter is, we can't pick them up on radars. So they pick a spot fairly close to Gion's compound, and they roll in. I was like, oh, but it's like, will they get there in time to help Ingu? But your boy Bion steps in, and it's like, right, he probably, I don't know if he knows that Bion is an agent at that point in time, but he knows like, oh, you're a traitor. It's like, yeah, you killed your right hand man for nothing, your boy David, you killed him for nothing. So, and then the DEA rolls deep. Like, I don't think we saw a single DEA agent like die. We saw every single one of Gion's men die, like, except for the few that got like knocked out like during the like chase later on, like the one or two that got knocked out. I mean, one of them might be dead just from the impact of like Ingu's truck like hitting Gion's. But other than that, there was a guy that Ingu knocked out. He might be like the only other person, because literally everyone else got bopped. Everyone's just like sniper shot, bam, bam, bam. Like everyone got taken down. So I was legitimately worried for Agent Kim when Gion shot him in the leg. And I love in that moment, because he is who he is, like he can't set, like, no matter how much he wants to act like I've said it in the previous episode, act like he's better and above it all. He got consumed by his rage, and like one of his guys had to pull him back, and he was like, no, let me go, because he wanted to make sure he killed Ingu and Agent Kim. But it's like, because he couldn't control himself, he was just so upset. But bullets started flying, his guy got hit, so they're trying to take Gion, get him out of there, got him in a vehicle. Your boy Ingu's like, no, he's not getting away. And then like Kim and that other guy had like their duel, but it's also like, yeah, your boy's kind of got shot in the leg too, so he's not 100%, and he's getting choked out. And you're like, oh boy, this is not good, because this guy isn't just a hired gun; he's also like an avid believer in all of this, just kind of like Lee was. And so now it's a situation of like, oh god, this is bad, and he's choking Agent Kim, and Agent Kim like takes the glass to his neck. I'm like, yes. So that works out, and Ingu's in like hot pursuit. The chopper can't really kill Gion because they need him alive. So, but they are taking out everyone else, which I don't know. Like immediately when that car chase sequence was kind of happening to some extent, immediately made me think of like Uncharted 4 to some extent, because like there's sequences where you have to jump on the back of people's truck, and it's not a 1-to-1, but it kind of reminded me of a similar sequence in Uncharted 4. So. Ingu might not be a trained agent, but I think the argument is you're just super lucky. I mean, maybe you can make the argument his training in martial arts, like, it doesn't prepare you for all of that. Because even later on, it's like he can't, like, I mean, you're fighting fist to fist. It's like, unless you catch a person off guard with, like, your judo, like, tosses, and that's what, benefits him. I mean, that's his go-to move. I mean, it's very effective because it's laid quite a few, half a dozen people on their asses throughout the course of the show, but... the moment he peered off into the woods, I'm like, come on, sideswiped him, and he does. I'm like, yeah, but it wasn't like the heavy sideswipe I thought it was going to be. And him tussling with Gion, and I'm like, yeah, I don't know why. It's that thing of like, I always like things coming down to just purely a fist fight. I mean, once again, you're like you're not a trained fighter, not a trained agent, so it's like, it just comes down to just bare like brawl fisting. He's trying to get in a boat to get away. He doesn't have the gun. Him choking Ingu with the rope was almost like, oh, that's kind of coming full circle because he killed the guy that was trying to blackmail him in episode 2, and I was like, oh, like that's almost coming full circle. He got the gun. Luckily, that missed, and and also there were no bullets in it. Ingu grabs onto Gion and is like, right, this is for ruining my life, but also Young-soo, which I didn't even bring up, like, he had saw him in his dream too, so. But the DEA arrives, and then it's like, oh, hey, Mr. Gu is, yeah, I'm with the NIS, and along with conjunction with the, DEA, you're under arrest, and all Gion could do was laugh. So it's like, okay. So it's just like, okay, everything's resolved. They're in a helicopter, and it's just like, hey, everything's good. Everything's great. I love the back and forth between Agent Kim and Ingu being like, hey, like, can you check on my mom's car when we get... He's like, okay, yeah, sure, no problem. Just bring it in. Just, let's get home first. And Choi thanking him for everything, and it's just like him finally coming back home. And I love that thing of him like, wow, did you get prettier when I was going? She's like, yeah, and it seems like you got uglier while you were gone. You know, I mean, your handsome face is one of the reasons why I married you. And I'm like, it's so nice for him to be back with his family, and his kids like, oh, are you going to leave again? He's like, no, never. Like, he's back home and he plans to stay home. So I was like, that was kind of a nice resolution. Everything worked out. The DA planned on learning all they could from Gion about the Cali cartel, and they were like, right, once he's given us what we've needed, we talked to him, we're going to hand him over to the Korean, hand him back to Korea for you guys to, bring him to justice for what you need to, do. So then, like, I figured, like, hugging his family might be it, and then we got the tag at the end with, like, the 6-month time skip, so... I was almost wondering if it was going to be Agent Kim, but it ended up being Agent Choi, who shows up and is like, oh, hey. And just here's Ingu working at that auto shop again. And I think for him, it's just, yeah, he's just kind of done with everything. And it's just like, yeah, he's going back to living his life because he kind of took it for granted. It's like, yeah, I wanted money. And it's like, yeah, like, look how that played out. I literally spent so much time away from my family. Like, he hasn't seen them since... like, so much time was away from his family. Like, he nearly died so many times. And it's like, right, I did a good thing in the end. But it's like, right, I just want to accept my life as it is. I have my family. I'm not going to be so caught up in, whatever. Life might be hard, but it's fine. I've got my family by my side. And that, makes me, I think it's almost that it makes me the richest man in the world, still having my family despite it all. I have my health, I have my life, and I have my family. And that's all that matters. And it's like, right, when it comes to the money situation, the government still NIS hasn't paid him everything they owe him. So, they're planning on giving him 2, like, karaoke bars. But didn't they specifically say that they were, like, managed by, like, the NIS? I guess it's like maybe they confiscated them in, like, another bus or something. It's like, right, you can have these places. But for Ingo, it's just kind of like, no, I'm not going to do that. Because I think it was a thing of he was working so hard to dig him and his family out of debt. Like, he wanted such a better life. And it's just like, we're going to take things in strides. I think it's like, I don't want to get mixed up in that situation where it's like, he doesn't want to go back to that considering like, that's what set things in motion for him to kind of decide to go to Suriname with Young-soo. So he's just kind of leaving that all behind. He's like, yeah, but it's like, why? It's for free. He's like, yeah, but I've learned that there's nothing in life for free. It's like, right, that whole skate situation was supposed to be like a surefire thing, and it blew up in their faces, and he lost his friend because of it, and he got wrapped up in all of this shit. So it's like, no, I'm good. I'm content with my life being what it is. But then, like, there's the whole thing about Gion being like, oh, yeah, he wants that ball back. I'm like, why is that so significant? He's like, yeah, it's a counterfeit, right? It's like, no, it seems authentic. I was like, well, because to be fair, they did the whole soccer ball thing, so we know that was, like, a forged signature. But it's like, oh, this is authentic. And it's like, could it be? It's like, oh, the way Gion's acting about it. And then just the final shot of the episode is Ingu looking at it. So I guess it's just like right, I could sell this ball. Like I gave it to my kids at like it was nothing because I figured it was fake. But it's like, oh, it might be an authentic signature. I could actually make some money off of this kind of. It's like, well, maybe in the long run might not have gotten 100% the money he got some of the money, and Young Su's family got some of the money from what they got paid up front. But then it's like, oh, this might be just kind of, well, you got some golden goose out of it. Not like a golden goose, but you walked away with something that is probably like decent value that kind of could put you and your family in a better position. So, but I don't know if that's almost that type of ending of almost like, ooh, don't get so wrapped up in that, you know, I feel like it could be taken two ways of like, oh boy, like hopefully you don't find yourself in some other shenanigan-filled adventure because of this. Like, oh, things are going to go not the way you think they are and might go a little sideways. Or it just might be a thing of, hey, you walked away from like what the NIS was going to give you, but it's like, oh, you kind of found a gift in the end that could be worth something in the long run. So once again, all that could be me misreading things, but I figured this would have a decent, like, happy enough ending, and it seems like, oh, everything's resolved. He's back home. Gion's in prison. I mean, it's still, like, I mean, I'm like, in the grand scheme of things, there's still, like, the whole cult situation. And yeah, a lot of his soldiers died, but it's like, well, what about the women and children that were, like, maybe they're free now to get the help they need, and, I mean, the president of Suriname, like, what the hell's going to happen there? Because he never rolled in with the tanks and stuff to back up Gion, because it's like, no, I'm not about to turn this into a national incident. Like, I'm not about to, like, bring the full force of the U.S. government down on my ass. Like, nope. So he's still allowed to do whatever he wants to. Now he doesn't have Gion to kind of line his pockets. So it does shift things over that he probably won't win the next election, like, without Gion to help him. I mean, the guy still, like, formed a coup, but it probably won't work out for him in the long run. I mean, that country's, like, fucked in so many regards. But I think, because it's like, well, I mean, Chin's been removed and Gion's been removed from the equation, so it probably, like, heavily weakens, like, the president's power, so that country could kind of get back to maybe where it needs to be with its next election. So that's what you're at least hopeful for. So, but it's like, yeah, there's still a lot of stuff in the Suriname area that's like, that's not resolved, but it's in a place where it can begin to be resolved. So I don't know. As I was saying at the beginning, season finale, series finale, I don't know, because I figured what the nature of this story is. I'd assume, like, this seems like it is a finale. I was also looking up something else that obviously the show came out like, what, a couple days ago at the time we were recording this. So it's not like that soon for Netflix to say anything. But also, as someone else had I was reading an article that kind of pointed out, a lot of Korean dramas don't, like, go for long periods of time. Like, Squid Game in particular is like an anomaly. Like, that's an exception. Like, most things are like one and done sometimes. I think a lot of, at least to my understanding, at least, like, I feel like a lot of Asian television kind of works that way. Like, typically ends up being one and done. I know a lot of British stuff is shorter, but not a lot of British stuff is one and done. But I feel like a lot of Korean stuff is. At least a few things I've seen have been like one and done to some extent. So I could definitely see this being the end of this. If you did do a season 2 of it, like, it wouldn't even be Ingu anymore. I wouldn't think. I think he'd have nothing to do with this. I guess you could always, maybe wrap him up in something, but I feel like it'd be more like a Choi and Agent Kim situation. Like, you'd probably follow them as they go, like, undercover with some other operation. But I think, no, I feel like this story's done, and I'm kind of satisfied with the ending being what it is. If it does get a season 2, I'd be so surprised. I just feel like it doesn't lend itself 100%. I think the whole point was following Ingu as he found himself under these circumstances. So, like, it not following him, you know, like I said, you could kind of continue it just like with Agent Kim and Choi, but I feel like a good chunk of it is just following Ingu in this complicated circumstances. So, once again, there's always, I guess, room for other elements to kind of play out, but I feel like overall it's just kind of been resolved. So, if there ends up being more, I'm interested to see what they do, but like I said, I'm leaning more towards thinking that this is the end. And if it ends up being the end, I've thoroughly enjoyed this wild, crazy crime drama ride. And I wish everyone involved, cast, crew, in front of the camera, behind the camera, the best in their future endeavors, whatever they may be, you know? So, but that's really all I want to talk about Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.